And then when we finally defeated it, when Iron Curtain was brought down, when we left prison, when we judged free will, it seemed to me that more or less anti-Semitism is behind us. That anti-Semitism belongs to the regimes which need scapegoat, which is a dictator always needs enemy.
Welcome back to NGO Monitor podcast in conversation with Olga Deutsch. NGO Monitor is an Israel-based research institute that does a simple thing. We defend Israel's right to exist within the human rights space. There is no more pressing time to do that than today. And this morning, joining us is an absolute legend, someone who has painted the reality of the Jews and Jewish community in the 20th and 21st century, and in many ways defined what being Jewish means. And that is the unbelievable Natan Sharansky. Thank you so much for joining us today. Natan is not only the member of the NGO Monitor's International Advisory Board, but he comes with an amazing resume that started with being a refusenik in Soviet times, and someone who has become the symbol of the plight of the Russian Jewry to leave and come into freedom, and then consequently played many roles as Israeli politician, leader of Israeli and Jewish national institutions, Jewish agency, has been the leading voice in fighting anti-Semitism, and all in all is a giant of everything that we know Jewish and Israeli today. Although this morning we come together to discuss not so easy and not so light topics, and I want to frame the conversation with you not about the torture that you've been through in the Soviet gulags and maybe what people would expect us to talk about. I want us to frame it in a broader context of democracy today, what it means, how it intersects with the rise in anti-Semitism and the challenges that we face both as a Jewish community and as the Jewish state, the state of Israel, and how they play into the broader geopolitical picture. So you survived the Soviet gulag and torture, physical and emotional, and you experienced dogmatic totalitarian regime in which truth is twisted, and whoever tries to spell it out is made to feel like the crazy, the madman. I myself come from Serbia, so I can tiny bit relate to that because I was also born in a Soviet-like, Soviet-style regime. And especially since October the 7th, at least to me, it seems that we are living in a version of that, just in contemporary times. Can you recognize some of this in Western democracies today?
Well, that's really a very sad and even scary thing, how the type of totalitarian ideology in which we lived in the Soviet Union is coming back. In fact, Marxism-Leninism, in this most primitive form, is coming back in terms of in the form of woke movement. And later I can explain why it was more or less the same. And the ban of human rights, which was so clearly belonging to us, to the dissidents, is how it was taken from our hands and now belongs to the modern totalitarian ideologies. In the Soviet Union, I was at the same time the activist and spokesman at the time of two movements, the Zionist movement and human rights movements. And though there were objections on both sides, but they were practical objections, like people from Israel were saying, well, stick to Zionism, we don't want to irritate Soviet authorities too much. Of course, human rights is a good thing, but why to infuriate them? And they really didn't like it. On the other hand, some of my dissident friends were saying, well, decide, are you the universalist or a person of your own struggle? But there was no ideological problem. It was so clear that our Zionist struggle for our right to leave Soviet Union and to go to Israel is connected to basic human rights. So the right to move, to live where you want, the right to have your religion, which people are deprived, the right to speak what you think, and people are deprived to get access to the literature which is of interest for you. So all the basic rights were violated. And while you're fighting for the right of Jewish people to live as Jews and to live and to join Jewish state, it was natural at the same time also part of the bigger struggle for basic rights. And what we opposed? We opposed some very primitive theory, which was saying that ideology, that in order that everybody will be equal, we have to divide the load of the class of oppressors and oppressed, and oppressed are always right, and oppressors are always wrong. We should not permit to oppressors to speak because it makes more difficult life of the oppressed. We should give the power to the oppressed. There is no such a thing as freedom of speech in general. The speech is free if it is supporting the oppressed people, and so on and so on. All
I
this.
feel like you were describing
Yeah.
emphasis in the state.
So today, you take from this critical race theory, for example, like almost the base of woke movement, the word race, and will replace it with the word class. You'll get typical classical Marxism, Leninism, Bolshevism, which we had to study and to pass exams every year and to demonstrate our loyalty to this ideology. So it was clear for us that all our problems as human beings and as Jews, and of course anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union, it was the result of totalitarian regime. And then when we finally defeated it, when Iron Curtain was brought down, when we left prison, when we joined free world, it seemed to me that more or less anti-Semitism is behind us. That anti-Semitism belongs to the regimes which need scapegoat, which need the dictator always needs enemy. And it's certainly internal, not to mobilize his own people. And there was no better enemy in the Soviet Union as Jews or as Israel. So it was part of this dictatorial regime. And the fact that 20 years later, in my activity as a minister after torture of Gulag, I started dealing with torture of Israeli politics, and of course it wasn't very pleasant. It was rather challenging, and here suddenly comes something that from my previous life. It is Durban conference. I'm the minister in Israeli government, responsible among the other things for diaspora, and here comes Durban conference, which was supposed to be the conference against racism. First time that United Nations is organizing global conference against racism. And for 3 years, special committee they were. In fact, the man who was warning the Israeli government was Irene Kocher. She was carrying from this committee saying, it goes in the wrong way. They are not talking about racism. And really, the conference took place, and the only conclusion is that South Africa of today is Israel, and that's apartheid, that's genocide. And then I really I reacted very strongly. That's new anti-Semitism. And I was challenged by the leaders of the Europe, from France, from Scandinavian countries, who were saying, how can they use this racist? We are against racism. Of course, it means that we are against anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism was such an awful play. We did so much to remove anti-Semitism from the life in Europe. And now that we are critical about Israel, you call it anti-Semitism. That's when I had to bring my criteria of 3 Ds, demonization, politicization, and double standard, saying, look, don't you see that you're using the same instrument, the same approach, which the most primitive antisemites for 1,000 years were using against Jews, turning them into kind of Satan. Sartre said for anti-Semite, Jew is the most close to Satan. Now that's what they were doing, and using absolutely different standards, creating special laws for Jews, and denying their right to exist as a religious nation. So each time when you in your criticism turn Israel down, what you're writing that Palestinian refugee camps is Auschwitz of today. I was many times in refugee camps. It's an awful thing. We can discuss how it happened that fifth generation of Palestinians lived there. But what it has to do with Auschwitz. And you use this word because it is the closest to Satan. And how it can be that Israel is condemned by United Nations and more than all the dictators together? And I was given all types of technical explanations from the leaders of the Western world. But no technical explanation can deny the fact that in order to have these statistics, we have to apply very different standards to this country. And of course, the 100 years of denial was the right of Judaism to exist. And Stalin's articles that Jews are not a nation. Now, the only country which existence is put under question is Israel. So that is really interesting question, how anti-Semitism became part of the free world which believes in democracy, which believes in human rights, or they think they believe in human rights. And anti-Semitism became important part of everyday politics in practically all the intellectual centers of the free world.
So what you're really saying is that, we always say that anti-Semitism is the best barometer of the overall how liberal the society is, or how free or democratic it is. But what you're saying is actually that anti-Semitism might be the center stage of how unhealthy the contemporary societies are when it comes to human rights, because they have twisted them entirely.
Yeah, well, but that's more or less the same. The first assumption, second, of the same time. Yeah, the fact that in fact our enemies, Islamists, terrorists who really want to destroy Israel, succeeded to use philosophy of human rights or ideology of decolonization as part of their struggle. That's a alarming sign. That's very bad for us, but that's a very alarming sign for how easily Western democracy, all these ideas of society built on human rights, how easily it can be turned into the society which is run by totalitarian ideology. And the fact that what happened with the woke movement, it's not accidental that new anti-Semitism was just as an introduction to the woke movement, and in the woke movement, Israel is the center, is this symbol of colonialism, and Jews are the symbol of oppressors in America. So it's closely connected. Anti-Semitism can be early warning for what is going to happen in the society, but anti-Semitism can be also the center of the clear picture of what is happening now in the society.
Before we move on the same note, I just want to say that, Natan mentioning the Durban conference is quite telling, because NGO Monitor was founded by Professor and President Gerald Steinberg as the direct result of Durban conference and that bias. And he was one of the first people to say that it is basically this new strategy, new anti-Semitic strategy laid out to us, which is revamping the Zionism is racism, and everything we're seeing today is just a development of that.
I remember it very well. I was as a minister of diaspora, one of the things which decided to organize is global forum on anti-Semitism, which continues until now But now there is a fight between foreign ministry and other ministers. And then there was no fight, nobody was interested. So we organized a bold forum. And General became one of the, just created this NGO, new organization, became one of the main partners of
Partners in crime.
Yeah.
I remember I was a Jewish student leader in Europe. We had the European Union of Jewish Students, and we were getting ready to send a delegation to Durban. And we were getting ready as well, just in terms of how everyone actually knew inside of the Jewish community. We knew what was coming. We were discussing what could be the way to fight back all this anti-Semitism. No one knew how bad and how dramatic it will be, but there were no surprises that it was going to be something historical for the... I want to take us one step further. You've said a lot about the fact that we sort of live in a postmodern society where the mere notion of ethnic belonging, right, and identity is deemed heresy. Basically, it's the antithesis to it. It's the society is so dogmatic that anyone saying that, I belong to the Jewish people or I want a nation state, right, the Jewish people is considered heresy itself. And you've written many books, and in your books you particularly deal with two issues. In 2004, you wrote that the prime goal of the U.S. foreign policy is to spread democracy on one hand. And then a few years later, in another book in 2008, you write about the identity being the central pillar of how democracy can defend itself and its values. Can you connect these two for me in the context of today and answer a question? Can modern time democracy defend itself now from all the attacks from within and from the outside?
Well, for me, it is very easy question, because it so happens in my life that I was deprived in my childhood both of identity and of freedom. We had no identity. No holidays, no language, no religion, no Brit Milah, no Bar Mitzvah. The only Jewish thing which we had was Antisemitism. And so you have to learn how to adjust to this. And you're adjusting to this by being the best in physics or in mathematics or in music. That's what your Jewishness means, to succeed in spite of antisemitism, professional. And we had no freedom. But you are not fighting for freedom, because the only value that you have is survival. And then when, in my life, it was up to 1967, that Israel entered our life, and we started learning in the underground about ourselves. So that if you want, you can have history, you can have people, you can have country. And then when you discover your identity, it gives you strength to speak for your rights, then for rights of other Jews, and then simply for freedom. So when so many people are saying to me that you have to separate, you have to decide, are you fighting for this or for this? I believe they are absolutely wrong. If you have strength to fight for your freedom or the freedom of others, it's only because you have the source of this strength. And the source of the strength is your identity. So that was my experience. And then I found myself in the free world, where suddenly you see, very early understood that the danger of these ideals of John Lennon's world. Imagine how it will be put if the world will be without borders, without religion, the world where there will be nothing to die for. And the idea was that in the name of everybody should be equal, you should be nobody. And that's exactly what communists were saying. They were taking away from, in order we are creating equal society, first of all, we take all the property because we will distribute. And then we take all the nationals because there should be no nationals. And we take away all the religion because religion is opium for the people. And that's how we are creating society of equal. And here coming young, progressive, educated people who don't who are against totalitarian regimes, and that is why they are against nation, against religion, against borders. Well, there is nothing to die for, and then really you create society which is not ready to die for nothing, what means it cannot defend itself. So that is that danger of decadent, falling, sin society without any identity. And I was warning about it, both in my book, How Democracy is Important, the Case to Democracy, the book Defining Identity, how these two things have to go together to defend one another. Not only they're not enemies, because in the modern decadent philosophy, it's like two enemies. If you are for democracy, you should be against all the identities because they are creating barriers, and we want to remove the barriers. And then you find out that you have no ideals in your life, and you can't defend it. So these two things have to strengthen one another. And I'm a little bit more optimistic because I think this process of denying identity went so far, and suddenly Europe is shocked how weak their societies are against people with strong identity. So what we have, one hand we have Europe with very weak identity, but strong belief in freedom, and then a big influx of people who don't believe in democracy, but who have very strong identity. And then now we see how it starts turning opposite, how nationality and religion, national tradition again become value. Of course, if you go to one extreme, it's actually going to go to the other extreme, from one and the others you explained. So I hope in the end we'll meet somewhere in the middle. But I do hope that this idea of building life without any identity is more or less reached its
peak.
I hope.
Because it's exactly as you say. I struggle, like when they ask me in the media, they don't understand why do we keep insisting on having a Jewish state.
Yeah.
And they even find it contradictory that we can have a Jewish and democratic state that defends and protects liberties and freedoms of all its people, although its character is Jewish. And I think you hit the core, which is, if there's nothing to fight for, nothing to identify, then what are we all doing here?
We Jews are interested to have a Jewish state because we need a Jewish state. But the world should be interested that our state will be Jewish. Because there is no way to create here some abstract democratic state. After all, why all these people around us will be it? Why should they agree if we are abstract state of everybody? What will give us the strength to fight against all these people who say, no, you're part of ours? Well, what is the difference if we are part of Egypt or we are part of Syria or whatever else? If there is no desire and readiness to fight for this continuity of this tradition of 1,000 years and for Jewish people to have their own state. So to defend this small island of democracy in the Middle East, you can do only with having very strong identity.
Let's take it, that same line of thought, but we take it a little bit to even more existential threats to Israel. We just came out of another war with Iran. That was the most serious and the most frightening, and the most dangerous one, and the most lethal one, right? And there has been a question following the 12 days of conflict, who won? All three sides, like US, Israel, and Iran, obviously came out of it claiming that they won. Last week, I published a piece where I basically say that it's not about who won in military terms. Rather, it begs the question, who will be the one that will change the order of the Middle East? And the key question is whether there will be a fall of the regime in Iran. And the only way to do that is you can start with weapons. But the only way to finish it is by inspiring democratic processes and supporting the Iranian people to rebel and overthrow the system. And preparing for our conversation, I saw that you recently wrote a piece about Iranian dissidents and the attempts and the approach that the Western countries, particularly U.S., have had towards this. I, in my piece, challenged the Western democracies that if they will dare and have if they will be brave to mobilize as they, in theory, know how to, they could support the Iranian people in overthrowing the regime. Do you think there is a chance for this to happen? Or do you think they will succumb and just, continue with the same practice, which is fighting for democracy in Israel where it's easy?
Yeah, well, as to Iran, because from our point of view, there are two aspects. First, it is physical threat for 20, 25 years, for 30 years, in fact. From the time that I joined Israeli politics, all Israeli governments feel that that was the biggest threat. And I have to give here credit to Benjamin Netanyahu, who from 96 was talking to me, but I became young minister in the government, what we have to do, what kind of messages I had to bring to Russia, and somebody else had to about Iranian threat, about leakage from technology. And we were preparing to attack, and we were scared at the same time. We never knew what would be the result. And in fact, as we now saw, we prepared very well, and all our efforts of the last 10, 15 years, united with efforts of the developing weapons, having intelligence, and so on, happened to be very successful. And even 2 months ago, we didn't know whether it would be successful or not. So that is a huge practical victory, which changes when you think in terms of our standing, political standing. The other thing is whether we really can remove it as a threat from temperature. I always was in the government, sometimes in minority of one, speaking about 20 years ago, believed that the real change will come through regime change. And regime change, not the one which we will bring, but the one which will be brought by civil society, and we have honored to support it. To say in 2007, I think Gerald also was there from the IANS, the Václav Havel, organized the, and Maria Aznar, who was the Prime Minister, in Spain, reorganized the Conference of Democratic Dissidents from non-democratic countries, from China, from Russia, but mainly from the Middle East, in Prague. And in this conference, everybody agreed that everybody expected the changes of the Muslim world, the dissidents from Egypt and from Syria and from Lebanon and from Iraq, and 3 of them from Iran. Everybody expected that the first candidate for regime change is Iran. Why? Because they were the most developed civil society. They were women's organizations, students' organizations, trade unions were rather powerful then. We all go against this regime. And it seems that the majority of the population is double thinkers. Like in the last years of Soviet Union, when people really don't believe they have to follow the rules, they're afraid. But so it was really right. I have to say that I wrote about it, I spoke a lot about it, about regime change. In my only meeting in my life with Obama, then was a candidate. I chose to speak with him about it. It was soon after the talk. I chose to speak to him about Iranian dissident and how it is important to support them. And we are not talking about support to sending the army, but their centers were then mainly in London. Also London and America, but then it was mainly London. And they needed means for communication, all types of technical and support. There was one small radio here, the problem of communication was much bigger then. There was no internet. And the Free World always felt, and the Israeli government, it's a small group of courageous people, but what really? And Obama became very enthusiastic and said, "You'll see how I believe in it. I'll support them." 2 years later, Iranian people did go to the streets, and they were ready for revolution, and they were waiting for the message from the free world. Then President Obama, in fact, said publicly that engagement with the regime is more important than replacement of the regime. And that was like a huge retreat.
Mm-hmm.
Then I called them to one who was responsible for his human rights speeches. I said, how can it be when the leader of the free world is betraying revolution? Then they said that we had the information that it would be dangerous for Iranian dissidents if you say publicly something in that book. Of course, it was not such. I spoke to many Iranian dissidents, and they felt exactly as we felt in the Soviet Union, that they're risking their life. And the only way that the more the free world expresses the solidarity and support, the less the danger for their life, and the more the chance that many other people will hear their message. Definitely that was a lost opportunity. Now today, we had to fight, right? But I'm glad to see that there are more and more people in the West, and even in Israeli government, who do believe that that can happen. We should go to the other extreme and to decide that we can do it for Iranian people, or that we can decide who of the Iranian dissidents will be the leader. All those dissidents always have many different groups, because that is totalitarian regime encourages these splits. They have all the opportunities to do it. But in the end, it is dissidents themselves who have to find ways to work together. And we have to be ready to help to any of them, those who will have more name recognition and will show. There is a lot of initiatives now in Iran at this moment. People from America, Iranian diaspora from America and from London are trying to establish as many contacts as possible. People inside Iran try to cooperate between themselves. No doubt that situation is ripe, and with some smart policy we can help them.
From Iran, let's jump to Harvard.
Yeah.
Seemingly a big jump, but in line with our conversation, which basically you keep telling me with each question that it is the weaponization of human rights and the defeat of democracy as we know it that are the main reasons why we're seeing the anti-Semitism, but also more broader, the failure of the Western democracy to address issues like the totalitarian regime in Iran or anywhere else in the world and protect themselves. You recently wrote a piece about your travel and visits to U.S. campuses and what you have encountered there, from being attacked to speaking to students. Tell us a little bit more about the face of anti-Semitism that the young people are facing today, and how I'll repeat that. Tell us a little bit more about
we have to get our studio prepared.
yeah.
All right.
I'm just thinking, I think it, yeah. Tell us a little bit more about what young Jewish students and students by and large are facing on campuses today. What is the modern face of anti-Semitism? And is the young generation equipped today with the identity that we spoke about to defend itself or to defend democracy or its right to speak up? Is there hope?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that we are dealing with a very deep, with a problem which has long history. So that I recently wrote an article. I wrote this article in 2003 when I had my tour over the American campuses as a minister, and I wrote an article, Masala Shetach Kamush, traveling to occupied territory, where occupied territory were American universities. And in fact, then
In
2003, there was no encamping, there were no demonstrations like it was today. So it sounds ironic that 20 years before this, we could already speak about it as occupied territory. Why? I decided that it's very serious. In fact, I said to Ariel Sharon, I believe that the most important battlefront for the future Jewish people are American universities. Why? Because for the first time since I came from the Soviet Union, I saw the fear of many Jewish students to speak in support of Israel because it can endanger their career. When a postgraduate student from Harvard Business School, she's telling me that she wanted very much to sign a letter against divestment. Now it has been years that it was divestment. But she knew that there are some very important, 3 professors who are important for her career, and they will not like it. And so she decided that she will wait for 3 years when her career will begin. It's not in Moscow, in my days. It's in Harvard Business School, and the same then in Columbia University and York University. In York University, some men just said, for me as a liberal Jew, it will be better if Israel doesn't exist, because then I don't have to defend every day myself for all this sort of things. And then at the time of Second Intifada, when we have terrorist attacks here. So that was the real alarm for me, that something is happening very wrong, that just these bastions of democracy and freedom, people feel uncomfortable to start speaking on behalf of freedom and democracy and on behalf of the right of Israel to live. And it was before woke. So it was not yet ideologically formulated in such clear terms as oppressors and oppressed, that Israel is the last remnant of colonialism and so on. It was not there, but the signs were there. This new class of liberal professors already understood their liberalism as something as defending the most defending the most primitive terrorist organizations like PLO then against the state of Israel. In fact, later I found out, then I didn't know, that Said already 10 years before said to Yasser Arafat, he was professor of Olga, Palestine, that you're making mistake by insisting that your conflict is between Palestinians and Jews for the land. That you have to connect this conflict to the major developments of the world, and first of all to this colonialism. And that's, we could see the beginning of the fact how Israel becomes part of colonial world which has to be destroyed. So it was 20 years ago. And then I initiated the program in Jewish Agency to send Israeli fellows to the camps. So today it's like one of the most important programs in order we can be there. Now, in addition to this, I have another hat involved in ISGAP. And ISGAP made a very important research for 7 years following the money. And just the last 2 years published a lot of reports how tens of billions of dollars moved from Qatar to American universities. And in influence on the policy of the administration. So on one hand, we have faculty, which is growing with this idea of the world without identity, which is supporting terrorists. On the other hand, we have administration which in the best is paralyzed, but in the worst accepts that all these centers for Middle East studies, all these centers of antisemitism. And then all this exploded on the 7th of October when the worst massacre in the modern history and the most awful rape in the modern history happens, and the many intellectual leaders in Harvard and other places say that is the beginning of the liberation. And I think that was, I hope it was an eye-opening moment for many people who could see that these human rights organizations are not human rights organizations. This League of Defending Women is not League of Defending Women, that all this progressive movement is not our allies, because it's neo-Bolshevik movement, which is, in fact, against the real freedom to fight terror. And I have to say that spending so many efforts to explain why there is deep connection between old antisemitism and new connection, and to explain that this human rights organization of today, it's not what it really meant. The same organization might target with different types of organization. And it was difficult to explain. Here came Hamas and explained it in one day. And, well.
But did it? I'm very glad that you mentioned the human rights organizations. I was going to finish our conversation with an NGO monitor question, right? Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the biggest ones, Oxfam, but then an area of smaller groups that we look into, whether it is Palestinian terror-affiliated groups, some to Hamas, most to PFLP, but to bona fide terror organizations, whitewashing their narratives and their politics at the end of the day, not just physical violence, but their politics and normalizing it. Has Hamas explained it? As horrific as October the 7th has been for us and continues to be, has the world understood? Are we better off today, 20 months after October the 7th, than we were on October the 6th, in terms of the modern Western democracies starting to understand how defeated from within they are?
Well, they started to understand not because of us, but because of what's happening in Paris and London. I was told how many journalists in London were shocked when they saw this violent anti-Semitic demonstration to the center of London. Suddenly understand that it's also threatening. But let me take one example, to show what changed. Human Rights Watch, you mentioned. Human Rights Watch originally was called the Helsinki Monitor Group. How it was created? We in the Soviet Union created, Helsinki Agreement was the one which connected human rights and the relations, and we, Soviet decided that's the great moment for us to make sure that the world will not be duped again by Soviet Union, and we created Helsinki Monitoring Group in the Soviet Union. In 1 year, we were all arrested, but during this year, we really published 20-something documents, which became the base for discussion in all over the world, in the Congress, how to judge Soviet Union about human rights. Bob Bernstein, who was the publisher of Random House, came to visit Moscow and was introduced to me, and I took him to the Sakharov, and he became very impressed by the fate of Soviets. So he created in America Human Rights Watch of America in order to amplify the voices of dissidents under dictatorship. And he was thinking about us specifically, then about dissidents in China and so on. So when I was released, it was like such a natural partnership of And we were so grateful to Bob Bergson. And Bob Bergson was the head of the Human Rights Watch until, I think, 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Then he resigned. Why he resigned? Because he said that now it is absolutely different organization. We were speaking about how to amplify the voices of the dissidents under totalitarian regimes. And what you are doing, you are simply going to the places where it is easy to see some violations. So the more closed society, the less the chance that you will report about it. And you know fully the difference between democratic society, which has its problems, and totalitarian society, which doesn't permit this to speak. So it went through awful transformation, both Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. But with Amnesty, also I was a little bit connected about Soviet Union, but less. But this organization, which was like built together with us on the base of our struggle, and went through such an awful transformation, and it symbolizes what's happening with the world, liberal world in general. Our liberal world, the world of equality turns into the world of equity, which is, of course, which means from democracy to totalitarian regime. Yeah.
Darkness.
Yeah.
It really is darkness. So what you're basically saying, to wrap up our short conversation this morning, that sadly there will be much more work for NGO Monitor, exploring and documenting the systematic abuse of the human rights mandate by NGOs and anyone else within the human rights community who claims to promote liberties and democratic values. And we're not going to go out of business anytime soon.